Good evening. I'm here to talk to you about how to use your feet and your voice to change the world. How many of you, when you were little, did this? Probably most of you. I know my two girls did when they were growing up, and it's a natural thing for us to do, to want to put our feet into the shoes of someone that we admire, someone that we aspire to be. I am thankful that my two daughters' feet actually grew larger than mine, or I probably would have no shoes in my closet right now. My name is Wendy Davis, and I am an activist not only for women, but for everyone in this room. And I have learned a thing or two about what it means to lace up a pair of shoes and stand and speak on behalf of others. This is not unique in our history, the capacity of us to put our shoes into the place of others and to stand for them. Just last week, we celebrated Women's Equality Day, the 95th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment that gave women the right to vote. And of course, though women clearly were a large part of moving to make that happen, it couldn't have happened if they couldn't convince a group of men who were in office, who were making this decision to put themselves in the shoes of women and to understand the importance of giving us a voice at the ballot box. This is no different today. The times that we are living in today demand of us that we consider and step into the shoes of peoples whose lives may be different than our own, whose challenges may be very unique. This is one of my favorite group of people in the world. This is the Earl Warren Supreme Court. This court made history time and time again, and our country would not be what it is today had it not been for them. They were the deciders of the seminal desegregation case of Brown versus Board of Education. They also were the deciders of the seminal case that ended biracial marriage bans, among so many other achievements. But what do you notice when you look at this picture? Their shoes. They're all men, right? And they were all white. So who is Earl Warren, and what gave him the particular capacity that he had to put himself into the shoes of others? Earl Warren was actually the Attorney General of California and then became governor. And he was primed to become president. In fact, wanted to run for president in 1952. But he brokered a deal with Eisenhower that if he, Earl Warren, would deliver his California delegates over to the Eisenhower column, he would be given the first opening on the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, that first opening happened much more quickly than people thought it would. Fred Vinson, the Chief Justice, died in 1953, and Earl Warren reminded Eisenhower that he promised him the first seat, which was the Chief Justice's seat, and he was appointed as Chief Justice. Eisenhower was later to call his appointment of Earl Warren as Chief Justice one of the greatest mistakes of his life. I view it as one of his greatest accomplishments. So Earl Warren, he and his 8 fellow justices were able to put themselves into the shoes of others, in this case, Ruby Bridges, entering her school in New Orleans 2 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision was handed down. The National Guard had to be called into Louisiana to enforce the order, as it did in other states as well. So Ruby's companions here, federal marshals on her first day in school. How did Earl Warren form the capacity to consider what it would be like for Ruby to have an equal education in the eyes of the law? When he was Attorney General, Earl Warren actually was tasked with carrying out FDR's order to inter Japanese in California. And Earl Warren visited those camps and was overcome when he saw the human indignities that his own actions had wrought. He talked about it in his autobiography, what it was like to see people who had essentially been imprisoned for no crime whatsoever other than being of Japanese descent in America during World War II. He looked at families separated from each other, children separated from parents, and he never forgot it. And it formed for him an incredibly important part of who he became and who he invited his fellow justices to become as they issued unanimous decision after unanimous decision. You may recognize this gentleman, another one of our modern-day heroes, Justice Anthony Kennedy, who just wrote the majority opinion in the Obergefell case, the marriage equality case. He grew up very conservative, an Irish Catholic family. What was it about him that allowed him to step into the shoes of and consider the dignity of couples who had been denied the opportunity to marry simply because of their sexuality? What gave him the ability to write these beautiful words in that opinion? They ask for equal dignity in the eyes of the law. The Constitution grants them that right. Many legal scholars believe it was his friendship with Gordon Shaber that led him to understand and to humanize and to believe in the dignity that all should share in the sanctity of marriage. His mentor and friend, George Shaber, was gay. And though Mr. Shaber was not alive to see this decision, I have no doubt that when Justice Kennedy read the decision from the bench, George Shaber was in his mind. These are two remarkable women. Sometimes we find ourselves standing in the shoes of someone that we wish we had never had to stand in. And I know both of them would say that to you. Bushra Awad and Robbie Damlin are from two warring areas of Israel and Palestine. They have each lost sons to that conflict, one from Israel, the other from Palestine. And in their grief, they could have become bitter of enemies. But instead, they formed an incredible friendship. They are part of a group known as the Parents Family Circle Forum, a group of over 600 Palestinian and Israeli families who have lost a loved one to the conflict. I hope as you look at this picture, you notice their shoes. Black and white Converse tennis shoes, the uniform attire of the Parent Circle Families Forum, an outward symbol of the fact that they literally now are standing in each other's shoes. Now, you may remember those shoes. I will never forget them. But before I put those on that day on the Senate floor, my values, my understanding, my ability to step into the shoes of people that I was fighting for were formed. It started with my maternal grandmother. My maternal grandmother was only 13 when she married. She had her first child when she was 15. She laced up a borrowed pair of her mother's sturdy, low-heeled, lace-up shoes to marry in. And at 15, and only a sixth-grade educated person, she and my grandfather at 17, only a fourth-grade educated person, traveled by horse and wagon across the Texas Panhandle as tenant farmers. They would live most of their lives this way. They bore 14 children. And my grandmother knew the double sting, not only of what it meant to be poor, but also what it meant to be discriminated against in this country, because my grandmother was half Native American. She used to lie and tell people that she was Black Dutch to avoid the particular discrimination that was levied upon Native Americans in this country. My mom only had a 9th grade education. She's seen here holding my daughter Amber, obviously at Halloween. My mom, in her orange and white Brahms ice cream and dairy store uniform that is emblazoned in my mind because most of my memories of her growing up were of her in this uniform. She became the sole support to 4 children when my parents divorced, and we struggled, as you can imagine, on an income like that. But what I remember about my mother, even more than this uniform, are these shoes. Comfort, orthopedic shoes that so many people who work in the kinds of jobs that she worked in wear in this country every day. I too had some struggles of my own when I was young. But what differentiated me and my opportunity to move forward was that I had 2 things available to me that neither my mother nor my grandmother had. I had an education. I was given affordable community college education, and that helped me put my foot on the rung of a ladder to move upward. I also had an opportunity to receive free health care at a Planned Parenthood clinic near my home. That Planned Parenthood clinic made it possible for me not to have a second unplanned pregnancy, which would have completely derailed my opportunity for a better life for myself and for my daughter, Amber. So perhaps you understand why the 2 filibusters that I conducted in my Senate experiences were 1, to try to stop cuts to public education, and 2, to try to make sure that women had access to safe, legal, reproductive health care. So what about you? Millennials. You are an extraordinary generation. You share many of the values that my generation and generations before you shared, wanting to have a family, a stable home, to be able to afford small luxuries in your life. But more than any generation before you, you are also interested in doing something of value in the world. You have come into the world and grown up with this unbelievable capacity already to put yourselves in others' shoes. You've grown up understanding what it means to fight when an injustice has been remedied or needs a remedy. This is Emma Sukowicz up here in the far left corner. She's carrying her mattress around Columbia University in this photo. A victim of sexual assault, she was unhappy with the way that her university responded to that campus sexual assault, and she carried this mattress with her every single day to class to make the point that they could not ignore the experience that she'd had. These wonderful young people who are not black, but who clearly are protesting and standing in behalf of people who have been impacted by a criminal justice system that has failed to see them as human, as others. And then Sadie Hernandez in the bottom left, who staged a protest outside the governor's mansion against cuts to Planned Parenthood and their breast cancer screenings, not because she herself had had that experience, but because she knew people back in the Rio Grande Valley where she grew up would need that care. Sometimes you also get involved in political elections, and this picture, of course, was taken on the UNT campus last year. Can you imagine the impact that you each could have if you take your unparalleled capacity to step into the shoes of other people and add your voice to the equation? Imagine the day of the filibuster in Texas if all of these thousands of people had not shown up. It would be a very, very different day. In fact, poignantly and beautifully, it was literally the crying out of the people who were there who carried that filibuster over the midnight deadline, not me. So imagine what might be different as you trade shoes. And if you used that to help someone lighten their load, to help carry their burden. I love this photo of Emma Sukowicz and her friends at Columbia as she is graduating from college. they helping her literally carry that mattress across the stage in symbolic support for her experience. Imagine what it might mean if you were to walk your shoes to the voting booth every single time there was an election and weigh in. Imagine what it might mean if you were to use your desire to do something on behalf of others, to do something valuable, to run for office yourself like these two millennials did. Remember this photo. What's different today? It may seem small, but these three women added to the Supreme Court have made a remarkable difference in the way the court has viewed cases before it. It's only 3 of the 9. We're expecting you to do something to get that number up a little bit. And let's think about what might happen if you really were to engage. Let's look at what that looks like today. This is a chart of millennial participation in presidential years. Clearly not as high as we want it to be. And let's face it, the old people are voting in large numbers. If their values aren't necessarily reflective of your own, imagine what's happening. There is a tendency for our millennial generation to feel that politics doesn't speak for them, that it's broken, that they shouldn't engage in it. But please remember that behind every political system are simply people who you have an opportunity to elect. In midterm elections, it's even worse, where participation drops off incredibly low. Imagine what it might mean in a state like this one, where millennials to participate. Particularly imagine it when you understand the numbers that you occupy in our population. In 2008, millennials were 20% of the eligible voters in this country. But by 2020, you will be 40% of eligible voters. What might that mean if you were to express your voices at the ballot box? What values might suddenly be represented by the people that you are putting in office? A lot of people say to young people, the future is in your hands. But really, it's in your feet, in your capacity to put your feet into the shoes of others and to use your voice to fight for change. Thank you.